Have you ever noticed that the more we try to control life, the more it slips through our fingers? We live in an era where effort is glorified. Sleeping less is seen as a symbol of success, and those who rest are viewed as lazy. But what if all of this is a lie? What if it's precisely by not trying so hard that we achieve true fulfillment? It sounds counterintuitive, I know, but the master Lao Tzu already said that true strength lies in not forcing. There is a subtle and profound art forgotten in the rush of modern life, capable of completely transforming your relationship with life. Wu Wei. In this video, you will discover why stopping the need to control everything might be the greatest act of wisdom on your journey. Together, we'll dive into a path where action doesn't mean struggle, where waiting is synonymous with power, and where silence speaks louder than 1,000 words. If you're tired of chasing after things, of feeling like life is always slipping away, this reflection is for you. By the end, you might not have all the answers, but you'll discover that you never needed them to live in peace. You know, for a long time, I believed that only those who forced things succeeded, that the world belonged to those who fought, who never stopped, who were always racing against time. But one day, I got tired. I found myself exhausted, not from doing too much, but from trying too hard. That's when I began to understand what ancient masters have been whispering for millennia. There's a subtler, quieter force that doesn't shout, impose, or rush. It just flows. It's strange at first, even uncomfortable, because we've been taught that acting is the opposite of waiting. But what if acting sometimes is simply not interfering? Look around. Have you noticed how nature doesn't force anything, yet everything happens? The flower blooms without haste. The river follows its course, even if it encounters rocks along the way. And yet, everything fulfills its purpose. Isn't it curious to think that perhaps our anxiety to control every detail of life is exactly what prevents things from flowing as they should? I started doing this experiment, observing more and forcing less. It was uncomfortable at first. It felt like I was letting life slip through my fingers. But gradually, I realized I wasn't losing control. I was letting go of what I never had control over to begin with. And this changes everything. Instead of chasing after things, you start attracting them. When you stop forcing a friendship, it grows. When you release the desperate desire for a result, it comes. Or something even better comes instead. It's like that moment when you stop looking for the key, and suddenly it appears in the most obvious place. It seems magical, but it's just natural. What's yours comes when you're present, not when you're tense. For me, this is Wu Wei. It's not about being passive. It's about being in a state of deep presence. And the most curious thing is that when you tune into this frequency, there's something I took a long time to understand. And maybe you're going through it now too. The feeling that if we don't hold on to everything tightly, it will all fall apart. It even feels like a survival instinct. To control, predict, anticipate. But no one tells you the cost of this. The anxiety, the frustration, the constant fear of losing. And when you look back, you realize that almost nothing went as planned. Yet, you still made it here. That says a lot. The problem isn't wanting to get it right. It's clinging to the idea that there's only one right way to live. When you try to control everything, you end up blocking the natural flow of things. It's like holding water in your hands. The tighter you squeeze, the more it slips through your fingers. There are moments in life when the best choice isn't to fight, but to yield. Not as someone who gives up, but as someone who understands that there's a right time for everything. I remember a time when I wanted to solve everything at once. Career, family, future. I thought I needed to have answers. But only when I let go did the answers come, one by one in their own time. And they were within me all along, suffocated by haste. Think about it. How many times has life surprised you precisely when you stop trying to control it? We confuse control with security, but often it's control that keeps us trapped in suffering, not accepting that something has ended, that someone has changed, that a plan has failed. That's resistance. And to resist is to suffer twice. First, for what happened, then for what you insist on not letting go of. Applying Wu Wei here is like creating space in your chest. It's trusting that life has an intelligence greater than our planning. And when you start living this way, you discover that relief comes even before the solution. And maybe that, have you ever seen a river try to push a rock that appears in its path? It doesn't fight. It flows around it. It moves on. And in its own time, it even shapes the hardest stones without hurry, without stress. The first time I heard this metaphor, it seemed beautiful but distant. Today, it makes sense in every little situation of daily life. When a plan doesn't work out, when someone doesn't act as we expected, when life presents you with something unexpected, fighting doesn't change it. Forcing makes it worse. And insisting on resisting only wears out the soul. The wisdom lies in flowing around, not colliding. This is where Wu Wei comes in, the silent art of dancing with life, instead of fighting it. It's not about being indifferent or weak. On the contrary, it requires courage, because the flow is to trust. To trust that, even if you don't understand now, the curves of the river will take you where you need to be. I've hit many rocks head on thinking, I can't give up. But over time, I learned that wisdom isn't about insisting. It's about realizing when insisting has turned into stubbornness. When I stopped pushing the world, I found paths that were there all along, just waiting for me to stop closing my eyes with the force of control. Flowing isn't about settling. It's about acting at the right moment, with lightness and awareness. It's as if life has its own rhythms. And when you align with them, everything becomes simpler. Have you noticed how there are days when you do less, but everything yields more? That's it. Flowing is aligning with what alive, inside and outside of you. Instead of spending energy on what doesn't depend on you, you start investing in what does. Your presence, your attention, your way of responding to what happens. And in this silent dance between what comes and what goes, have you ever experienced the power of simply not responding, not reacting immediately, not fighting back, not justifying? At first, it feels strange. The mind screams for answers, for explanation, for control. But silence has a kind of strength that only those who allow themselves to listen can understand. This is where Wu Wei resides. The non-action that isn't passivity, but deep presence. Because observing is different from ignoring. Observing is seeing with calmer, more lucid eyes. And often, when you observe, the answer arises on its own, without you having to fight for it. There are days when life seems to provoke you, test you, squeeze you, and all we want is to act, to solve, to react, to defend ourselves. But the more you give into this impulse, the more you lose yourself. I've learned, through mistakes and scars, that some of the best decisions of my life were made in the space between an impulse and silence. That moment when you breathe, observe, and let it pass. Not as someone who runs away, but as someone who chooses not to waste energy. And in that space, everything becomes clearer. You see that the fight wasn't with the other, but with the ego. That the urgency was in the mind, not the heart. Observing is a revolutionary act in a world that's always shouting. It's refusing chaos, even when it tries to pull you in. And this applies to everything. A difficult conversation, an important decision, that day when everything seems out of place. Instead of acting in the heat of emotion, try this. Retreat. Look. Feel. And only then, if necessary, move. But by then, you won't be reacting. You'll be responding with awareness. And it's in this kind of response that freedom lies. Because when you learn to respond with silence, surrender, this word is always carried a weight, as if it were synonymous with weakness. But it's not. There's a kind of surrender that's powerful. The kind that comes from the awareness that not everything is in our hands. Letting go, often, requires more courage than insisting. Because insisting gives the illusion of control. But letting go is a leap into the unknown. It's admitting that no matter how hard we try, some things belong to the flow of life and not to our command. And this, instead of being despairing, can be liberating. I remember when I had to let go of something that, at the time, I swore was essential. It was a project where I placed all my expectations, but it wasn't moving. No matter how much I dedicated myself, something seemed stuck. I spent sleepless nights trying to figure out what was missing, until one day, exhausted, I simply let go, and it wasn't with anger. It was with acceptance, with a sigh, and Believe me, when I let go, other doors opened. Things I hadn't even considered started happening. I realized that sometimes we hold on to something so tightly that we don't see what life is trying to give us. Surrender, in the deepest sense, isn't about abandoning. It's about trusting. It's understanding that life has an intelligence that goes beyond immediate logic. Letting go isn't losing. It's creating space. And this applies to everything: relationships, plans, fixed ideas. How many times have you held on to something out of fear of losing it, when in reality it no longer made sense? When you let go, you align with Wu Wei. You allow the flow to carry you, and you stop being an obstacle to yourself. And it's curious how, precisely in the state of surrender, waiting has always seemed like a punishment for those trained to act all the time. In this culture of urgency, patience has become synonymous with passivity. But time, when understood well, is a silent teacher. It's what ripens fruits, soothes wounds, and reveals what was once hidden. Wu Wei, conscious non-action, isn't about doing nothing. It's about knowing when not to act. It's about trusting the rhythm of things, without anxiety, because sometimes the best attitude is simply to wait, not with frustration, but with wisdom. There's a peace that arises when you stop chasing the right moment and understand that it's already coming to meet you. I learned this in moments when everything seems still. You know those days when nothing moves? When it feels like the universe has forgotten you? Yeah, on those days, I learned to cultivate internal silence, to use the time to observe myself, to take care of myself, to prepare the ground. And without realizing it, when I least expected it, something blossomed, as if time had been working behind the scenes while I learned to trust. Waiting with awareness is different from settling. It's like planting a seed. You water it, care for it, protect it, but you don't dig it up every day to see if it sprouted. The trust is in the process, in the invisible that's happening, even when it doesn't seem like it. And the beauty of this is that when you learn to wait with presence, you start noticing signs that once went unnoticed. Small synchronicities, intuitions, invitations from life to follow lighter paths. And in this more patient and profound rhythm, there's a restlessness within us that sometimes confuses courage with a need to prove something. Have you ever felt this? The desire to show that you can, that you're strong, that you're right. But deep down, it's just the ego asking for validation. And the problem is that it shouts loudly. It wants applause, recognition. It wants the world to see the effort. But on the path of Wu Wei, this shout needs to be heard with attention and then embraced in silence. Because proving too much is exhausting. And living to please others is the perfect recipe for losing yourself. I've entered unnecessary battles just to avoid admitting I was wrong. I've held on to projects, relationships, even ideas just out of pride. But everything started to change when I realized that true strength isn't about convincing anyone. It's about being at peace, even when no one understands what you're doing. Wu Wei taught me that authenticity doesn't need witnesses, that acting in harmony with who you are, even in silence, is worth more than 1,000 words spoken to impress. And when you silence this need to prove something, you realize how trapped you were in a race that wasn't yours. The world pushes you to compete, to be more, have more, show more. But those who live in this cycle are always exhausted, always dissatisfied. Wu Wei proposes the opposite, to live lightly, without the urgency to prove anything to anyone, just to yourself, and even then with gentleness. So, the next time you feel like you're forcing a situation just to show something, ask yourself, who is this performance for? Because maybe when you stop trying to prove, we've been taught to trust only what can be proven. Numbers, facts, evidence. But what about that feeling that arises in silence? That almost whispered intuition that says, go this way. Wu Wei connects deeply with this, with a wisdom that doesn't shout but guides. It's as if there's an internal compass, pointing in directions that the rational mind doesn't yet understand. And the more you silence the external noise, the clearer this voice becomes. It doesn't explain itself, but it's felt. And almost always, it's right. Here's a real example. I once turned down an offer that seemed perfect on paper, but something inside me screamed that it wasn't the right path. Everyone thought I was crazy, but I knew. And months later, I saw the disaster would have been if I had gone. Logic said one thing, but intuition said another, and it was in the latter that I trusted. It's not mysticism, it's sensitivity, it's presence. It's noticing the signs beyond the obvious. When you live in Wu Wei, you start to realize that the best paths aren't the most visible, but the most aligned. Trusting intuition is an act of courage. It's saying yes, even without all the guarantees. It's walking the dark, but with faith in your internal compass. And this is learned day by day. When you listen to yourself, when you pay attention to the small discomforts, the small joys, the body speaks, the heart speaks. The problem is that the mind shouts louder. But if you silence it and listen more carefully, we live as if the present were just a bridge to the future, as if now we're just a stage until things get better. But the now is all that exists. It's here that you breathe. It's here that you feel. It's here that life happens. Wu Wei doesn't ask you to go into the future to solve everything. It calls you back to the present, to live fully the moment that's right in front of you. Because when you're present, even the simplest things gain meaning. A hot coffee, a calm gaze, a silence that embraces. Have you noticed that the mind is always trying to take you somewhere? What if this happens? What if that doesn't work out? And while it runs, the present slips away. And with it, the moments that truly matter. When I started practicing this radical presence, I realized how much I lived on autopilot. I did everything but felt little. I thought too much, but noticed almost nothing. Wu Wei taught me to breathe more slowly, to walk with attention, to truly be there, in every conversation, in every gesture. Being present isn't easy. It requires practice, intention. But it's in the now that transformation happens. Not tomorrow, not when everything is ready. It's now, even with everything imperfect. When you anchor yourself in the present, the worries of the future lose their strength, and the past stops holding you back. And it's in this simple, almost invisible place that you start to truly live. And the more you live in the now, this might be the greatest secret of all, detachment, not in the sense of indifference, but as freedom. It's when you stop depending emotionally on something to feel complete. It's when you desire but don't need. It's when you love but don't cling. Wu Wei teaches us beautifully that things come when they're not being forced. Love blossoms when it's not being demanded. Success arrives when it's not being desperately pursued. And well-being arises when you stop chasing it. I found myself trapped in cycles of need. I needed to be recognized. I needed things to work out. I needed to be understood. But the more I needed, the more it slipped away. Until, exhausted, I let go, not out of pride, but out of maturity. And that's when things started to happen. Detachment isn't the absence of feeling. It's the absence of dependency. It's when you are enough, and everything else that comes as a gift, not a need. And this changes everything. How you work, how you love, how you live. When you stop trying to control what comes, you start receiving what's meant to be. Wu Wei is a subtle dance between desire and freedom, between wanting and letting go. And the more you practice, the more you realize what's yours remains. What isn't leaves. And that's okay, because when you free yourself from craving, you create space for what's real. And in this empty, free, and light space,